Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 2nd issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And I'm going to start on the front page, and the big headline here reads, "We Are Go for All of Humanity." NASA's historic Artemis II mission launches with Canadian astronaut Jeremy Henson on board. And there's a picture of the rocket taking off with birds flying around, and it looks pretty spectacular with all the flames shooting off the bottom. And this is written by Mark Coley. Titusville, Florida, with a splash of light and a violent rumble rolling over the Florida marshes, NASA's Artemis II mission to send humans back to the moon for the first time in more than 5 decades lifted off Wednesday evening with Canadian Jeremy Henson on board. 12 seconds after 6:35 p.m. at Launch Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center, the 98-meter-tall Space Launch System rocket ignited in a shock of yellow and white, lifting slowly from the pad as its gargantuan 2,600-ton mass fought against gravity. 8 minutes later, leaving behind a plume of smoke, 2 boosters, an orange rocket tank, and some 2,650,000 liters of spent fuel, the Orion crew capsule drifted into space. A zero-gravity indicator, a plush toy moon designed by an 8-year-old from California, began to float in weightlessness. "This is Jeremy," Henson said just before launch. "We are go for all of humanity." Orion, now parked in high Earth orbit, is circling the planet as the crew tests equipment on board. If everything checks out, the crew will set off for the moon Thursday night in a maneuver called translunar injection. The crew capsule will slingshot around the far side of the moon and return to Earth, splashing down in the Pacific on April 10. U.S. President Donald Trump, during a televised address Wednesday night, said, "Let me begin by congratulating the team at NASA and our brave astronauts on the successful launch of Artemis II. These are brave people. I want to God bless those 4, Trump said. No crewed mission has returned to the moon since Apollo 17 in 1972, and no Canadian has ever left lower Earth orbit. Hansen will be the first. The only child of 2 automotive factory workers, Hansen grew up on a farm outside London, Ontario. He decided he wanted to be an astronaut at age 5 after seeing a photo in an encyclopedia of Neil Armstrong on the moon. While high school classmates hung pictures of girls in their locker, Hansen kept photos of the space shuttle. He spent 6 years as a fighter pilot and was selected by the Canadian Space Agency in 2009 to be an astronaut. This is his first trip to space. Hansen is flying alongside Americans Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, the first person of color to fly to the moon, and Christina Koch, the first woman. While the astronauts won't land on the moon, NASA hopes the mission will lay the groundwork for a landing in 2028, a $20 billion U.S., that's in U.S. money, moon base, and eventually sending humans to Mars. On Wednesday, as the clock ticked to zero, crowds lining Florida's Space Coast, on bridges, on boat docks, on sandy beaches, and planked boardwalks crammed to get a glimpse. The local sheriff's office expected up to 400,000 visitors for the most significant launch in generations. The countdown proceeded smoothly, save for 2 brief setbacks. The first came about 90 minutes before launch, when an issue with the flight termination system, explosive charges used to destroy the rocket if it veers off course, popped off. The second, about 60 minutes to launch, was a problem with the battery temperature sensor on the launch abort system. Both were quickly resolved. About 51 minutes after launch, Orion also had a brief loss of communications. The crew could hear mission control, but they could not hear the crew's response. It was later resolved. After a brief 54-minute intermission, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman said at a press conference after the launch, NASA is back in the business of sending astronauts to the moon. In Titusville, Florida, a town roughly 18 kilometers from the launch pad, some waded into waist-deep water for a view. Onlookers stood shoulder to shoulder at Spaceview Park, phones extended in the air, gasping and screaming as the fire from the rocket's powerful engines came into view. Cheers erupted from the crowd and, briefly, chants of USA as the rocket climbed, sending grumbles as loud as jet planes across the water. Two specks of light, the boosters, spent and separated, drifted down to Earth. Even 30 minutes after launch, streaks of hazy rocket fumes hung on the darkening horizon. Visitors began arriving on the coast Tuesday night, some setting up lawn chairs and overnight camps to claim their spot. The crowds in Titusville and elsewhere steadily built throughout Wednesday. A group of children played Uno to pass the time. Highway signs for kilometers around read, "Launch today, plan ahead." Jim Davis arrived around 9:30 a.m., a full 9 hours before the 2-hour launch window opened. He and his son, also named Jim, drove 8 hours from the Atlanta area. Davis had seen multiple shuttle launches and some 5 decades ago even spotted an Apollo launch from his backyard in Tampa. He and his son were equipped with binoculars, umbrellas, chairs, food, and drink to pass the time. "You're experiencing history," the younger Jim said. Blair and Damon Nickel, father and son from Uxbridge, Ontario, flew down for the launch. They're not huge rocket or space people, but the possibility of watching history was one they couldn't pass up. "It's once in a lifetime," Damon, 31, said. "Bucket list event." All right, the next article is also from the front page, and it is titled, "Reported Plan for Stellantis Facility Draws Backlash. Chinese EVs would be assembled at idled plant in Brampton." And this is by Josh Rubin and Robert Benzie. Stellantis is considering a deal to make Chinese electric vehicles at its idled assembly plant in Brampton, bringing furious condemnation from Canada's automotive industry, a top union leader, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Industry sources familiar with discussions but not authorized to discuss them publicly said the potential deal with Zhejiang Leapmotor Technology Co. is for knockdown assembly kits, meaning all the parts to build a finished vehicle would be shipped from China. Stellantis did not confirm or deny the news first reported by Bloomberg, saying the company is looking at next steps for its Brampton plant, but has nothing to announce. Stellantis remains focused on strong Canadian footprint and is actively evaluating future programs for Brampton with the objective to ensure that any investment decision is sustainable and a long-term commitment that supports workers and suppliers, said Stellantis spokesperson Louanne Gosselin. In Dallas, on a trade mission to Texas, the Ontario Premier expressed strong opposition to knockdown kits. "It's just not right that they're shipping these cheap kits, I want to call them, and assembling here. They're bringing over Chinese parts and they're going to assemble in Brampton. It's everything against what the federal government told the auto workers. This will cost auto workers jobs," Ford said in an interview. I know Unifor National President Lana Payne was saying the same thing, said the premier, adding Chinese automakers are welcome to do what Japanese firms such as Honda and Toyota did decades ago and establish manufacturing facilities here. If China wants to come here and they want to do similar to Honda and Toyota 40 years ago, they came here, they opened a facility. They buy Ontario-made parts and produce Ontario-made cars with Ontario workers. I'm all for it. But when you have cheap Chinese parts being subsidized by the Chinese government, but also paying their workers $5 an hour and affecting auto workers' jobs here, I'm dead against it, he said. Ford said allowing the Brampton Stellantis facility to be repurposed like that would hurt other auto companies here. The premier urged Ottawa to intervene and said the provincial government was looking into it right now to see what can be done to thwart the scheme. In an emailed statement, a spokesperson for federal industry, Minister Melanie Joly, didn't directly address the Stellantis LEAP discussions, but said the federal government is involved in a dispute resolution process with Stellantis after it shifted production of its new Jeep Compass model from Brampton to Illinois. The government is actively engaging with the company, Unifor, and the province of Ontario with a view to secure production, protect jobs, and ensure long-term investment in Canada, said Joly's spokesperson Isabella Orozco-Madison. Any new auto investments will prioritize Canada's supply chain, including Canadian labor and parts suppliers. Chinese automotive companies aren't likely to build or run a full assembly line here, said veteran automotive analyst Robert Carwell. There's a simple reason, he added. They don't need to. How China will dominate global auto manufacturing is economies of scale and cheap labor, said Carwell, head of automotive research at J.D. Power Canada, who wasn't referring specifically to LEAP. You don't do that by building full-scale plants all over the place. You do it by centralizing things in China. There's no economic reason for a Chinese manufacturer to have a full assembly plant here. A knockdown kit, said Carwell, is nothing like a traditional assembly line. It's all the parts in a box. It's like IKEA furniture, said Carwell. The head of Canada's largest private sector union slammed the idea of knockdown kits, saying they would decimate the Canadian automotive sector workforce. The jobs are kept in China where the parts are made, and the vehicle is pre-assembled before it is shipped overseas for kit assembly, said Payne, the Unifor National President. These knockdown kit plants would employ a small fraction of workers while displacing tens of thousands of direct assembly and auto parts jobs. The head of the association representing Canada's automotive parts makers blasted the idea. Chinese knockdowns might be a great idea in Brazil or Mexico, but we don't need them here, said Flavio Volpe, CEO of Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. They wouldn't be anything more than imports. I trust the government knows the difference and that we don't need a bad deal that freezes out Canadian suppliers. Stellantis owns 20% of Leapmotor and has a 51% stake in Leapmotor International. Through Leapmotor International, Stellantis is already producing Leap EVs in Mexico using knockdown kits. Under a trade deal with China announced in January, 49,000 Chinese EVs will be allowed into Canada this year at the most favored nation tariff rate of 6.1%. There's a plan for a review in year 3 to see if China is meeting its commitment to make a considerable investment in auto production in Canada. A senior federal official told reporters following the China deal that the government wants Canadian secure software like QNX used in EVs manufactured here. In November, Stellantis announced it would switch production of the new version of its popular Jeep Compass from Brampton to Illinois, just a week after U.S. President Donald Trump and his Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said they're coming for Canada's auto industry. And I need just to pause here a moment to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is also from the front page, and it is titled TDSB to slash 40 vice principal positions. Some schools will share VPs after cuts tied to board's loss of COVID-era funds. And this is by Isabel Teotanio. Toronto's Public School Board is cutting 40 vice principals for the upcoming school year, forcing some smaller schools into a shared model, which has current administrators worried about being stretched too thin. The Toronto District School Board, currently under provincial supervision, said 28 of the roles, 20 in elementary and 8 in secondary schools, were tied to pandemic-era funding that expired. Another 12 positions will vanish due to declining enrollment, with the board projecting 5,000 fewer students in 2026 through 2027. A spokesperson said each spring the TDSB goes through a process determining staff placements for the next school year to ensure that every school has the staff required to support the needs of students. Changes to vice principal placements represent the end of one-time provincial COVID funding that the board had continued to provide in recent years and declines in enrollment, the spokesperson said via email. In smaller schools, we are moving toward a model that would see a full-time vice principal have responsibility for 2 schools, a model that has successfully been implemented at other school boards. In some cases, combined vice principal teaching positions may still be required. It's important to note that the vast majority, if not all, of these changes will be attained through attrition. Still, administrators are worried, said Alitha Kashor, chair of the Toronto School Administrators Association, representing more than 1,000 principals and vice principals in public schools. We are always concerned when there's a reduction in school leadership and the impact that that will have on students, on the schools, and on the workload of all leaders in the system, she said. All school leaders are stretched really thin, and they work long hours, full days, and when there's a reduction, it's more work to be done by fewer people. Vice principals and principals typically share responsibilities overseeing school culture, school safety, and administrative tasks ranging from instructional oversight to budget and facility management. But a 2023 report by the association said the job has evolved, becoming increasingly unmanageable and stressful. It also notes that vice principals assigned to 2 sites, a model already in use at the TDSB, face double the workload. While she believes the supervisor and staff are being as thoughtful as they can be, these cuts simply underscore the inadequacy of the provincial funding formula, said Katrina Matheson, a co-chair of the Parent Involvement Advisory Committee at the TDSB. I'd love to see a budgeting process that didn't force us to ask, Is it possible for our schools to function this way and give space instead for how best would our schools function? Parents want to have this conversation with the Minister of Education. Changes in staffing stem, in part, from the board no longer having access to pandemic-era funding for additional staff and supports, which were largely phased out after the 2022-23 year. Although funding ended, the TDSB trustees maintained the additional staff, saying they were key in tackling learning gaps and supporting student safety. Last spring's trustees kept 93 positions for this academic year that were previously funded through the COVID-era relief. 40 school-based safety monitors, 12 social workers, 11 child and youth counselors, 2 caring and safe school staff, and the 28 vice principals. With the vice principal cuts confirmed, the fate of the remaining 65 positions remains unclear. Some parents are also voicing concern that principals are not seeking input from school councils on staffing models for next year, which is a consultation process that typically occurs in the spring. It's unacceptable that parents are being cut out of decisions that so directly affect our families, said Sarah Blumenstein of the parent-led Toronto Education Advocacy Network. Since the province took away our trustees and appointed a supervisor, we don't know what is happening or if the needs of our communities will be taken into account, she said in a media release. The TDSB said as enrollment and staffing numbers continue to fluctuate throughout the rest of the school year and over the summer, requiring adjustments, class assignments and final staffing models will be shared with schools on September 4. And the last item from the front page is under the byline of inside. It says, "Impossible for me to know it happened. Judge says she could not convict Stronach based on evidence from one of the remaining complainants." And the reason it said inside is because the actual story was further inside the paper. And so there's another byline here that says prosecutor grilled over inconsistencies in evidence. And this article is written by Betsy Powell. Superior Court Justice Anne Malloy on Wednesday said she couldn't possibly convict Frank Stronach based on the evidence of one of 4 remaining sexual assault complainants. Stronach, 93, was facing 2 historical offenses in relation to the woman who was the first to testify when his Toronto trial began in February. The judge stated her intention before closing arguments concluded Wednesday at the downtown Toronto courthouse. As it currently stands without that complaint, Stronach is facing 5 charges related to 3 women, reduced from 7 women and 12 charges at the start of the case. The woman testified that when she was in her early 20s in either 1980 or 1981, she worked briefly as a horse groomer on Stronach's farm in Aurora and ended up at his bar, Rooney's, in Toronto. There she alleged he sexually assaulted her on the dance floor and in a booth, and that she later woke up to find Stronach on top of her engaging in sexual intercourse. On Tuesday, Malloy grilled prosecutor Jelena Vlasic about the many inconsistencies in the woman's evidence, saying she was particularly troubled that she had vacillated on the exact year of the alleged acts. Malloy said she wasn't suggesting the woman, who, like the other complainants, can't be identified, made up her evidence whole cloth, or that she was lying to the court to get money, but she was concerned that over the past 40 years, she has added layers of things that happened. The woman could have been sexually assaulted, but the evolving narrative makes it impossible for me to know it happened, Malloy said Tuesday. The judge also cast doubt on the mechanics of the alleged dance floor assault, questioning how it is that no one noticed. Vlasic argued the bar was dark and maybe people wouldn't realize it was a sexual assault. Defense lawyer Leora Shemish described the first complainant as a storyteller whose evidence was wrapped in confusion and uncertainty. Her evidence was internally inconsistent and lacked credibility and reliability and became more absurd as her narrative unfolded, Shemish told the court in her final submissions. In 2015, the woman provided a statement to Toronto police alleging Stronach had raped her in the early 80s. No charges were laid, but in 2024, Peel police ended up charging Stronach based on her 2015 account. Also Wednesday, Vlasic pushed back firmly against the defense assertion that police conducted a shallow or biased investigation and rejected that officers simply opened the doors and accepted the woman's allegations without scrutiny. She said officers interviewed a large number of witnesses, including individuals favorable to the defense. They also went to locations mentioned in the allegations, such as the Lakefront Hotel condo complex, where they spoke to staff and attempted to corroborate details. The judge questioned why officers didn't seek certain records and wondered if it's part of the "we don't want to challenge what they're telling us." Vlasic noted there are inherent limitations when investigating 40 or 50-year-old allegations. Nor are police supposed to assess credibility, she continued. Their role is to determine whether reasonable grounds exist and then investigate, not to decide who is believable. The place for pointedly testing evidence is often at trial, particularly reliability and credibility. The prosecutor noted that for much of Canadian history, the legal system's treatment of sexually assaulted complainants was, quote, wrong. She pointed out that before the repeal of the old rape provisions in the criminal code, courts relied on a recency of complaint test. If a complainant reported the assault immediately, it was seen as supporting their credibility. If they delayed, that delay was held against them. She emphasized that this approach has long been recognized as misguided and rooted in outdated assumptions about how real victims behave. Vlasic ended her closing arguments telling the judge that after considering all of the evidence, the court should find Stronach guilty of the 5 remaining counts. The case has been adjourned until next Thursday. And the next article is under the byline of Queen's Park, minimum wage hike not enough for city life, agency says. Hourly rate to hit $17.95 in October. This is by Maura Welsh. Ontario minimum wage workers are getting a cost of living boost that will bring their earnings to $17.95 an hour next October. But that won't pay bills in Toronto, says the Living Wage Network. While an increase is appreciated, most workers earning basic wages in Toronto region need another $9.25 to reach the $27.20 living wage required for survival, said the network spokesperson Craig Pickthorne. On Wednesday, Ontario announced the annual increase tied to the Consumer Price Index at 1.9% will add 35 cents to the current $17.60 starting on October 1st. Only 1 in 4 minimum wage earners are aged 20 or younger, so for many, you have to decide which bills are going to go into arrears or which to pay, Pickthorne said. The network calculates the hourly wages needed to survive in certain regions, an assessment that includes basic expenses and rent. In 2025, Ottawa's living wage was calculated at $23.40, while Hamilton's was $22.60, and the lowest in the southern London, Elgin, Oxford region was $21.05. Ontario has more than 700,000 workers earning the general minimum wage, the government's release said. This annual increase helps ensure wages continue to reflect economic conditions while protecting workers and providing businesses with greater stability, the Ministry of Labor said. In January 2014, Premier Cathy Wynn's government passed legislation linking the increase to inflation, but 4 years later, the newly elected Premier Doug Ford canceled increases, only to add them back in advance of the 2021 election. In 2026, the ministry said a worker earning the current minimum wage in a 40-hour week will see an annual pay increase of roughly $728. And I need to stop once more to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is titled, Ford Takes His Anti-Tariff Message to the Heart of Texas. Premier says cost of living among top concerns in trade meetings. And this is by Robert Benzie. Dallas. Premier Doug Ford is in the belly of the beast. Ford, perhaps Canada's most outspoken politician when it comes to railing against U.S. President Donald Trump's levies on Canadian auto parts and steel, has taken his anti-tariff crusade deep into the heart of Texas. It's a daunting challenge in a Republican state Trump won by 13.7 percentage points in 2024, with a population twice that of Ontario and an economy even larger than that of Canada. But Ford, a frequent guest on U.S. cable networks, said the initial reception from business leaders and elected officials on his 3-day trade mission has been very positive, very friendly, very welcoming. Everyone tells us they love Canadians, and it's a big Ronald Reagan and George Bush state too, said the premier, referring to previous Republican presidents who were free traders, unlike Trump. I just say the same thing here as I say in the American media. I love the U.S., I love Americans. Canadians love Americans, and we look forward to continuing growing the business, he said Wednesday at a reception with business leaders here, and after sitting down with state Republican lawmakers and local officials with Toyota, Compass, Data Centers, and McKesson. Asked if he had met anyone in his private meetings who embraces tariffs, Ford shook his head. I didn't hear that once, he said, noting that cost of living concerns are trumping protectionist trade policies. We heard that loud and clear about affordability. On Tuesday, the premier was in Houston to huddle with representatives from Hewlett-Packard, WM, formerly known as Waste Management, Westlake Corporation, Waste Connections, and Mitsubishi. Thursday, he will be in Austin, where a previously planned meeting with Texas Governor Greg Abbott was in limbo due to scheduling difficulties. At Queen's Park, NDP leader Merritt Stiles expressed concern about Ford making his separate deals in Texas that could undermine Canada's overall trading relationship with the United States. He's always off doing cosplay as Captain Canada, but we don't actually see any results. What is he doing that is going to save the jobs that we just lost at Algoma Steel? What is he doing to save the jobs in Brampton at Stellantis? Said Stiles. It's a lot of cosplay. It's a lot of theatrics, but we don't actually see the result in the job creation here in the province of Ontario. What we see instead is a government that is bleeding jobs. That is a job disaster, she said. Interim Liberal leader John Fraser noted Ford's last intervention, a controversial Ontario government ad using 1987 footage of President Ronald Reagan blasting tariffs, has undermined Canada's negotiating position with Trump. The Reagan ad hurt us, the Prime Minister said so. It was a bad mistake, said Fraser, referring to Prime Minister Mark Carney's apology to Trump for Ontario's spot. Why was it a bad mistake? Because the Premier wasn't actually thinking about what his job was. He was putting on a big show. He does a great job. He talks a lot, talks a great game, but he can't deliver. And the ad hurt our negotiations, he said. So far, I think his marker of success in terms of dealing with the U.S. right now has been market share in terms of advertising and his appearances on Fox News. Fraser added that Ford should not have gone on a trade mission when the legislature has just resumed sitting after a 14-week winter break. The Premier had 102 days to go to Texas. He could go next week. He could go 3 weeks from now, when we're not sitting. Pressed on that criticism, Ford said the opposition leaders have never run a lemonade stand. You want to grow a province, a country, you have to travel. I encourage even the Prime Minister. It's about building relationships. I encourage every federal MP, every MPP, every mayor of every town across the country to go down into our largest trading partner, not just there, but over in Asia and South America and over in Europe, and talk about Ontario. Energy Minister Stephen Lecce, who was in Washington this week for an Ontario Chamber of Commerce Team Canada meeting in advance of the mandatory Canada-United States-Mexico agreement, that's CUSMA, review later this week, said personal outreach matters. As Canada and the U.S. review CUSMA, Ontario is back on the ground making the case for collaboration, not confrontation, as we face a common geopolitical threat in China and its proxies, said Lecce. With electricity and mineral demand skyrocketing, we profiled Ontario's nuclear advantage and vast mineral wealth, reinforcing our position as a trusted democratic partner, the minister said Tuesday. This visit is made amid a backdrop of China imposing export controls on minerals and rare earths as they continue to dominate mineral processing, with 90% of U.S. and European rare earths sourced from that regime, he said, adding, this work is laying the foundation for a successful CUSMA review and reinforces one of the most important economic relationships in the world. And the next article is under the byline Scarborough Southwest. Ontario Liberals spar over link to riding. Beach's East York MP Erskine Smith, a leadership hopeful, targets competitors' London ties. And this is by Rob Ferguson and Robert Benzie. It's a flashpoint in the hotly contested race to become the provincial Liberal candidate in Scarborough Southwest. Where do you live? The issue has been building since former New Democrat MPP Dolly Begum quit 2 months ago, defecting to the federal Liberals. Her surprise resignation opened a door for Liberal MP Nate Erskine Smith from the neighboring Beaches East York riding. His quest to become Ontario's next Liberal leader after placing second to Bonnie Crombie in 2023 would get a major boost if he can win a seat in the legislature first. While he's getting pushback for being the boy next door from riding nomination rivals, Erskine Smith is punching back at one. Everyone knows Hafiz is from London, except the Toronto Star, it seems, Erskine Smith said in a text to a Star reporter referring to Ahsanul Hafiz, an Ontario vice president of the Federal Liberal Party who owns 30 Domino Pizza franchises, mainly in southwestern Ontario. The text arrived after a Star story quoted challengers saying Beaches, East York, and Scarborough, Southwest are dramatically different ridings, in part because of the latter's large Bengali community. He's from Beaches, right? So it's a different ballgame, Hafiz said of Erskine Smith's chances of winning the Liberal nomination for a provincial by-election Premier Doug Ford is expected to call this summer. Hafiz told the Star he now owns a house in Scarborough, Southwest, and regularly goes to London, where the head office of his pizza chain is located. He owns residential property in London as well. After Erskine Smith raised his concern about where Hafiz lives, the Star searched public property records to confirm he bought a $1.26 million home in Scarborough, Southwest last October. Erskine Smith referred a subsequent request for comment on the house purchase to his leadership campaign's media team, which declined comment. I'm not sure where he's coming from. I'm here like full-time, said Hafiz, who was running hard for the federal Liberal nomination before longtime MP Bill Blair resigned to become Canada's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Mark Carney then appointed Begum as his party's candidate in an April 13 by-election. Anybody can throw mud at me, but I'll take it very positively. People in Scarborough, Southwest, don't like negative politics, Hafiz added. Kadira Jackson, a lawyer who placed third as the Liberal candidate in the riding in last year's provincial election, also said Hafiz's London connection is common knowledge. There are no requirements for MPs or MPPs to live in their ridings, and many do not, including Carney, who represents the West End Ottawa riding of Nepean, but lives east of Parliament Hill, and Ford, who represents Etobicoke North, but lives a few blocks south in Etobicoke Centre. Some elected politicians even move their families to Ottawa or Toronto so they can spend time together during the school year. But residency can emerge as an issue to be exploited in nomination battles or election campaigns. I am strongly rooted here with 2 children in a local school where I spent years on the parent council, said Jackson, who owns a home in the Cliff Crest area of Scarborough, Southwest. She moved to the riding in 2021. One moment, please. Okay, here we go. We want someone invested and present, someone who can be meeting and listening to constituents every day while at the grocery store or pumping gas, not someone who will be touring all of Ontario seeking support for his leadership. This is not a stepping stone for me, she added. Erskine Smith has been working to offset criticism, calling Toronto's East End and Scarborough a shared community in many ways, and noting he has encountered family friends, his old baseball coach, and former Malvern collegiate classmates while going door to door. The race here is really about who do folks here think will best represent them in a general election, and who will do the best job, said the MP who has been in the House of Commons since 2015. Another candidate for the Liberal nomination, who, like Hafiz, has Bengali roots, said she sees that cultural connection and her residency in the riding as an advantage. They are conscious enough to choose between the person who is not just thinking about himself or herself. Mahmouda Nasrin, an immigration consultant, told the Star in a thinly veiled shot at Erskine Smith. At Queen's Park, interim Liberal leader John Fraser declined to comment on the recent Star report that Erskine Smith was asking rivals to step aside, but he argued for a competitive race. Our nominations are going to be open and free, and that's the way it should be, Fraser said, noting a date for a spring nomination vote will be soon set. We need to make sure the candidate who gets nominated will have a chance to get out and work in the riding. And I need to pause one more time to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is titled, Officer Pleads Guilty to 2024 Assault. Man in homeless shelter suffered broken ribs, ruptured spleen after he was mistakenly tackled. And this is by Brendan Kennedy and Amy Dempsey Raven. Ian McKenzie was walking back to his room in a Toronto homeless shelter when he heard heavy footsteps behind him. Just as he turned around to see who was coming, he was tackled by a plainclothes police officer who had wrongly identified McKenzie as a suspect in a sexual assault investigation. The attack left the 49-year-old with 5 broken ribs and a ruptured spleen. The officer, Detective Constable Christopher Merritt, pleaded guilty Wednesday to assault causing bodily harm in the January 2024 incident. Merritt, a 23-year veteran of the Toronto Police Service, was given a suspended sentence, no jail time, and 2 years probation following a brief court hearing. The sentence was jointly submitted by the Crown and defense. Merritt is currently still working as a police detective. He earned more than $198,000 the year of the assault. It is not yet known what effect his conviction will have on his employment. A Toronto police spokesperson said they are reviewing the case and determining next steps. Merritt is also facing internal disciplinary charges for the incident. McKenzie and his lawyer were disappointed with the sentence Merritt received, telling the Star after the hearing that a civilian convicted of the same crime likely would have faced jail time. We should not have to fear the police, McKenzie said in an interview. On January 9, 2024, police arrived at the Toronto Plaza Hotel in North York, where McKenzie was living at a homeless shelter inside the hotel, to investigate a sexual assault. After speaking with shelter staff and the victim, police believed they had grounds to arrest another shelter resident. The suspect had a criminal record and history of violence. After McKenzie walked through the hotel's lobby, a security guard mistakenly identified him as the suspect. Merritt started jogging after McKenzie, who was walking at a normal pace. According to an agreed statement of facts read aloud in court, Merritt did not say anything to McKenzie other than, "Hey," before tackling him from behind. Merritt tackled him by wrapping his arms around McKenzie and landing on top of him, reads the agreed statement of facts, which notes that Merritt is significantly bigger than McKenzie. McKenzie was handcuffed and placed under arrest, but police quickly realized he was not the suspect. A few minutes later, police found the actual suspect and arrested him without incident. McKenzie initially declined medical assistance, but about a half hour after the assault, asked shelter staff to call him an ambulance. He was diagnosed with a severe laceration of his spleen, which had to be removed. He spent 9 days in the hospital. Following the surgery. The province's Special Investigations Unit charged Merritt with aggravated assault in August 2024. He pleaded guilty Wednesday to the lesser charge of assault causing bodily harm. In court, Crown Attorney Brian Gurton said if Merritt had done to the actual suspect what he did to Mackenzie, he could still have faced prosecution given the excessive force that was used. This was a mistake. It was a horrible exercise in judgment, but it was not malicious, Guertin said. Merritt is the son of retired Toronto police officer and the brother of Melissa Merritt, who last year pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the 2013 death of her ex-husband, Caleb Harrison, after a complex criminal case involving 3 victims and 2 accused that spanned more than a decade. Aside from entering his plea, Merritt did not address the court on Wednesday. His lawyer, Sandeep Khaira, told Justice Susan Chapman that he deeply regrets what happened and is very apologetic. To the Star, Khaira said his client declined to further comment. Chapman said she received numerous letters of support for Merritt, who she described as a good husband and an excellent father of 3. She said the incident was entirely out of character for him. Noting the severe consequences for Mackenzie, Chapman said she took some comfort in the fact that Mackenzie's guilty plea that Merritt's guilty plea will go some distance in facilitating any other sort of legal remedies that he has for injuries that he sustained. Mackenzie is suing Merritt and the Toronto Police Service Board for $2.5 million, alleging that police unlawfully detained him, used excessive force, and violated his charter and human rights. The lawsuit asserts that the police board, the civilian body that oversees the force, is liable for allowing an unfit officer to remain on duty. Neither Merritt nor the Toronto Police Service Board have filed a response to the lawsuit. Merritt is also facing potential internal discipline. Police tribunal records allege he did not use de-escalation techniques or discuss a plan of arrest with the other officers and instead used force that was unnecessary and disproportionate to the level of threat posed. In an interview after the hearing, Mackenzie said while living without a spleen has permanently compromised his health, the daily anxiety he now feels as a result of the assault has had a deeper effect. There's an edginess I feel when I'm walking anywhere, he said. I don't want anyone behind me. Mackenzie's lawyer, David Shelnut, said Merritt's conviction should lead to his firing. You should not be able to have a criminal record and be a police officer, he said. We really have to look at accountability in every opportunity we have to send messages to the Toronto police that bad behavior, criminal activity will be met with very stringent penalties. And the next article is under the byline Grassy Narrows. Chiefs demand apology from Carney. PM criticized for comments regarding protesters seeking compensation for mercury poisoning. And this is by Alessia Pacifiu. Ottawa. 2 First Nations chiefs are calling on Prime Minister Mark Carney to apologize for saying he could outlast a First Nations woman who was protesting over mercury poisoning in her community. Chrissy Isaacs, a Grassy Narrows woman suffering from mercury poisoning, was in Toronto on Monday to demand compensation from the provincial government for mercury contamination. The Dryden paper mill released thousands of kilograms of mercury into Grassy Narrows river system from the 1960s to the 1970s. It's widely considered to be one of the country's worst environmental disasters, and community members are still dealing with the fallout today. Isaacs and a group of community members and their supporters attended a news conference Carney held on Monday with Ontario Premier Doug Ford to announce new funding for housing. She and the other protesters could be heard chanting and shouting in the background about the mercury contamination. I can outlast her, Carney said, laughing briefly along with Ford and Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow. Grassy Narrows First Nation Chief Sherry Ackaby said Carney should apologize for his remark. Shame on you, Prime Minister. You're making a joke of my people, Ackaby told the Canadian press. And for all the people laughing behind you, shame on all of you. Chief Roland Fisher of Wabaseemoong Independent Nations said governments should not dismiss the concerns of his community members and called on Carney to meet with them. The Prime Minister's office said in a media statement Carney could not hear what the demonstrators were saying and that members of his staff spoke to the demonstrators to hear their concerns. It's not clear if the Prime Minister knew what the protesters were there for at the time he made the remarks. PMO spokesperson Audrey Champeau said Indigenous Services Minister Mandy Gull Masty is in contact with Grassy Narrows leadership to continue progress on critical projects ranging from a new health center, housing, and a Mercury care home that will help ensure those suffering from mercury poisoning have the care they need close to home. Ackaby said she has yet to hear from the minister and does not accept the claim that Carney did not know the nature of the protest. He's just trying to cover himself up now because he's realizing what he said is wrong. Shame on him, she said. Grassy Narrows is located some 150 kilometers from Dryden, Ontario, close to the Ontario-Manitoba border. Wabaseemoong Independent Nation is also nearby. A 2024 study from Western University found emissions from the mill, including sulfate, continue to wreak havoc on the community by generating methylmercury. The report found levels of methylmercury, the most toxic form of mercury, in the Wabigoon River's fish, may be twice as high as they would have been without the mill discharge. Grassy Narrows First Nation community member Julia De Silva said the entire community is upset with the Prime Minister. And I will end here with you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 2nd issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.